do things in paintings you can't do in real life. Like I can fracture and bend the space. I can warp gravity. I can do things that are weird or unnatural. And that's, to me, the way the world was feeling. And so I literally started glitching and fracturing some of these paintings and bending space and having gravity be warped, because that's kind of how I felt the world was going.
That's Scott Listfield describing his painting called Glitch. Yo, welcome to my Summer Lair. I'm your host and, of course, art model. Oh, yes, Sammy Younan. And with today's guest on the program, we class it up. We're joined by a painter, a visual artist. So tuck in that shirt and spit out that gum. It's company manners time. Scott's work is remarkable. His 500 plus paintings often fuse pop culture elements with like corporate debris and overlooking all that mainstream mess. It's a solitary astronaut. We'll reveal more about the astronaut as we talk. The painting he's currently discussing is Glitch. Okay, imagine a silhouette of a city, say like New York City or Chicago, but let's go with New York City. And above it, you would expect to have like sky, right? Well, in Scott Listfield's Glitch, there is no sky. Instead, it's all pixelated, as this other universe, for lack of a better term, starts to bleed through like a multiverse or something, and flying through the pixels is the General Lee, the infamous Dukes of Hazzard car. What? Yo! And standing in front of the cityscape and looking up at the General Lee flying through this pixelated universe that's bleeding through above the New York City skyline is an astronaut. No worries, I included the image in the show notes, but I just wanted to take a moment to highlight the competing aspects pushing for space on the canvas, because it's all wonderfully absurd and stunningly surreal. You can see why Killer Mike recently gave Scott IG love. I dig the guy's work, as you can tell, and so this was a treat to finally talk to him about sci-fi and painting and that lonely, judgmental astronaut. We never seem to get his approval. We even get into Fireside, Gary Larson's fantastic comic, which is always fun. That guy doesn't get enough recognition, so I was glad to tip my hat to him. Anyways, yes, here is Scott Listfield doing a better job explaining Glitch and the thinking process that prompted this painting.
I've spent most of the last 6 months in my own house just watching TV. And so, when you do that for that long, like you start building a relationship with TV shows instead of people, which also feels kind of weird. And that kind of reality started pouring into my paintings in a weird kind of way. So I started making paintings about, movies and TV shows and music that I was listening to. And, it occurred to me that when I was a kid, I actually really liked Dukes of Hazzard when I was a kid. I loved it. I had a bunch of the toys. And it wasn't until much later in life I kind of realized that I had toys that had the Confederate flag on it, which just, in hindsight seems very wrong. And I felt very weird about that. And so, I kind of, that one little painting with the General Lee kind of glitching by kind of encapsulates how kind of all those ideas about how the world I'm seeing seems to be broken, how things I'm watching on TV kind of are somehow creeping into my perception of the real world, how the things I thought of as a kid were kind of okay or not okay, and that we shouldn't take any of that for granted. Yeah, so I don't know. I felt weird kind of painting a Dukes of Hazzard car, but hopefully we'll kind of get what I was going for with that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing with, you have lots of pop culture references throughout your paintings. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that with pop culture, you can't, I guess, delete it or erase it. Like, Dukes of Hazzard is a thing that's always going to exist. Do you know what I mean? Regardless of how we feel about it. It's like, that was an actual show. I think it was like 7 seasons or 9 seasons, something ridiculous. Like, it was there. And that's the problem with pop culture. And I know sometimes we can come at different perspectives or have different emotions, and we get older and our perspective shifts. But it's just, we're stuck with pop culture. Like, once something is made and kind of injected into the mainstream, especially as that was on a national TV show or a national broadcast channel, it's like we're stuck with it. That's it.
Yeah, we're stuck with it, but I don't think that means we can't change the way we think about it. I mean, much like we can tear down statues, we can, I mean, I have a very different feeling about Michael Jackson and Bill Cosby than I did when I was, 12 for very obvious reasons. And same with Dukes of Hazzard to a certain extent. They're still out there in the pop cultural world, but, I think our perceptions of them shift and change over time as we kind of realize that, people we thought of as heroes were not heroes, and maybe people we didn't think of as heroes really were. So I don't know. People say like, oh, it's Dukes of Hazzard, or oh, it's pop culture. It's not really that important. And to a certain extent, that's true. But a lot of my work is about how pop culture really did kind of inform who I was. Certainly when I was growing up, but still right now. I don't know. I think it's important to always think about those things as we continue to live with them.
Yeah, when you first started painting, you were kind of doing it. You started in the late 90s, 98, 99, when Y2K was about to happen, and they were promising that airplanes were going to fall out of the sky, and it was also a new millennium. There was a lot of angst at that time, right? Because of all those kind of spiritual, emotional shifts that we were going through, and we didn't know about the technology. There was a lot of upheaval and kind of unsettling feeling as we kind of went in from 99 into 2000. Is that type of angst that we went through, does that mirror at all the current pandemic, or is it a completely different emotion?
I think it's a little different. I feel like 2020 is kind of what we thought Y2K plus like the Mayan 2012 thing was. I feel like this year has been what we thought those years were going to be, but 1999, 2000, 2012, like they weren't actually that big a deal. There was certainly, I mean, I don't know, there was changing times, and there was a lot of sort of weird angst in the air, but it didn't end up materializing into anything really substantial. But this year obviously has in ways that I think are, really unprecedented, certainly in my lifetime.
Yeah, and when you're talking about like your childhood, I felt like from about the Challenger disaster in '86, like up till about Y2K, like I felt like it was a string of broken promises. Like by the time we got to 2000, it's like none of us had jetpacks, none of us were vacationing on the moon, right? It was kind of like a bad marriage where like the future kept promising, like, baby, I'll change, I'll turn over a new leaf. And it was always lies, and then the promises would always be broken. I don't know if that's the same feeling you had, because I kind of feel like that appears a little bit in your paintings, that it was like this 2000 like onwards, like where are the jetpacks and moon colony vacations? This is a bust. You guys lied to us.
Well, that's definitely that part of it is actually, that's very true. That was a huge part of my original impetus for making some of these paintings back when I started. Because I started painting them right after I got out of college, and I was, I had, we were closing in on the 21st century, which when I was growing up, like you said, the 21st century was always the future, and the future always meant, living in space and having robots and all this stuff, and to reach 2000 right as I was, also reaching kind of adulthood, and doing things like getting my first job and living on my own for the first time. It was a frustrating, disappointing time, because the future was not the future I thought it was going to be. And that's definitely something that was an original inspiration for me, and it's something that I continue to think about. That said, the 21st century has become very weird and futuristic in ways I think that we didn't quite imagine it would be. But yeah, the whole like, hey, we'll be orbiting Jupiter and hanging out with robots, like that part just didn't really, we kind of dropped the ball on that one.
Yeah, that was a bust. It was like the internet, when the internet first came out. It's like, you'll be able to like look up anything, and you learn about bees and flowers, and like you can like read anything you want, and it'll be like, it sounded very much like a utopia. And then like when you look at where it is now, and you mentioned American politics just a little while ago, and how divisive it is, and polarization, and like people are like basically like looking up their own facts, picking up their own reality. I was like, that's not the internet you promised us. You like, what happened to that internet?
I know it's very frustrating that for the first time in anybody's lives, you can look up anything by just clicking a little button in your pocket, right? You can just pull out a device and look up literally any fact in the world. and yet somehow it seems like nobody actually knows anything anymore, and facts don't have any real meaning anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Which is frustrating. I don't know. Anytime anybody thinks a utopia is around the corner, that's when we should maybe be worried about what's actually around the corner.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to last, which I mean is the whole point of a lot of science fiction, especially in literature, is that they always set up these utopian societies, Brave New World and things like that. And then there's always somebody goes along and wrecks it or is not happy, and then it starts to crumble. Like it's very difficult to sustain.
Well, I think that's human nature. We're not designed to live in a perfect world. We are, I don't know, we're competitive mammals, and as soon as somebody gets a little bit of power or influence, it's like they want to do what they want to do. I don't know. I think I have trouble believing we're set up in a way to really achieve anything like a utopia.
So then, this is a strange question, so I don't know if you can properly answer it, but then, like, your work has these kind of retro sci-fi elements.
Mm-hmm.
How much of your time are you spend, like, thinking about the future, as we were just kind of talking about, or even living in the future, like you said, like mentally, just trying to picture what the future is like, versus like being present or even dwelling in the past? Like, how are you kind of oscillating between the three, the past, present, and future?
That's a great question. I for a very long time I've thought about my work as kind of mixing all three of those things together in a kind of way, talking about the future, but in a way that relates to the present, and that also very weirdly has a lot to do with the past. Because I'm thinking about movies like the original Star Wars trilogy, or Star Trek, or things that came out in the 70s, which is now 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So that's the past, but it was our idea of what the future was going to be like, and how that kind of, in a weird way, shapes the present. So those are things I've been thinking about for a long time. And as I continue to think about it, the more it sort of, even though I've been painting these astronauts for 20 years now, the ideas are still sort of crystallizing in my head in terms of like how I want to talk about these things. So basically, I do spend a lot of time thinking about the future, but mostly in the context of the idea of the future that we've written for ourselves, either through movies, through TV shows, through books, through literature, through comic books. This idea that we continually try to predict what our future is going to be. And some of those are dark, and some of those are light, and some of them involve space, and some of them involve all kinds of other things. But how that really relates to where we are right now, and where we've come from, and how, kind of in a weird way, our idea of what the future is going to be like messes up our present. Like Mad Max or something. We all look at that as a work of fiction, but then Australia was literally on fire last year, and now here in the U.S. the West is on fire, and deserts are encroaching, and so all of a sudden we look at Mad Max as like, well, wait a minute, like, is that really a future we want? Like, right now, this moment in time that we live in right now is the time to do something about it, and we seem a little bit complacent to look at some of these things as fiction, when maybe we should be like, well, no, maybe we don't want Mad Max to be the reality. So that was kind of a long, convoluted way of answering your question. But I think my paintings right now, I think I described them recently as a conversation about the future with the present. And I think that's a pretty good way of describing them. So I read a lot of science fiction literature, and I watch movies a lot too. And I'm always thinking about how, the things we talk about the future can affect what we're doing. Things like Elon Musk is trying to make things that sound right out of a science fiction movie,
Mm-hmm.
And it always cracks me up when things like the like a hoverboard or the shoes from Back to the Future.
The lace
People
ups.
are like, well, let's just make those. It's in a weird way. It's like the future we predicted 30 years ago, we're just sort of making it. Whereas if Back to the Future had never come out, we wouldn't really be doing that. So I don't know. It's this weird mix of like, what are we really doing right now, and how is that going to shape the future? I don't really know, but I am thinking about that a lot.
Yeah, you're talking about like things, for example, like the Star Trek, and how that the communicators influenced the flip phones we had in the 90s.
Yep.
And the other obvious one too of what you're talking about is Terminator 2, specifically Terminator 2 with Skynet. And we will make jokes and stuff like that. We have Skynet memes and stuff like that. But Skynet is actually pretty frightening. It's as a horror movie.
Yeah.
It's not something I would joke about. Like, but the movie was called literally Judgment Day. And humans were found wanting. You know what I mean? And we got erased.
Yeah, I mean, there's a food product out there called Soylent right now. Like, it's called Soylent. It's named after Soylent Green, which in the movie was made of people.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
But part of what I mentioned too, like Brave New World, and we were just like Terminator 2, and I guess this is related back to your paintings. But is there addicted is the wrong word, but I don't know what else to use. But are we addicted to like endings? Like we want to see how these things end? We're used to like the things we celebrate in our culture, like startups, right? Mm-hmm. And we like beginnings and things like that, and origins and all those kind of things. But are we also addicted to or curious about endings?
Yeah, I think the word I'd use is obsessed. Maybe I definitely think
there you go. That's a better word. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. I mean, not all the movies are successful, but there's a constant stream of movies coming out that deal with the destruction of the world in one way or another. And I don't know, these things go in cycles, like when Armageddon came out and Deep Impact came out the same year, like 20 years ago, and, Independence Day. And, I don't know. I've actually thought about this a lot. I'm really not sure. I'm sure there's people who've written theses about this, but like, I don't know why it is we're so obsessed with how things end for our civilization, but we really are. And yet we seem kind of unable to really, and almost paralyzed to really do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's with this pandemic. I'm not gonna say it's funny, but it's because nothing about the pandemic is funny. But it's odd that if you watch any sort of disaster movie, there's always some scene where the science advisor is telling the president, we have to do this or we're all going to die, and the president is like, no, I'm going to ignore you, and like his evil advisor is like telling him to ignore the scientist. That's like a major plot point in every single movie. And those people are always seen as stupid and bad and evil, and yet we're living through the exact thing right now where the president is like ignoring his scientists, and there's a whole bunch of people who are siding with, we've seen this movie. Why why are we siding with the bad guys of the movie again? I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that, but
well, that's the thing. It's what you're saying too is it's kind of sometimes the sci-fi falls on deaf ears. Like how many times have we referenced 1984, right? And it kind of like we know to pay attention and to kind of keep history alive and all these kind of things, and then like nope, we just teach different things in school and like. The places where you expect like 1984 to be vibrant, it's dying.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going with that point. Is that's what really surprised me. That's the part that I always felt was not realistic about those movies. Is when like the head of science is like, we need to do something, we're all going to die, and like people are like, nah. I was like, really? You probably listen to that guy. And now that we're living through it, I'm realizing like, no, actually we don't.
Yeah.
And to your larger point about like ignoring history, ignoring 1984, that's just exactly literally what we've been living through these last 4 or 5 years. There's this rise of global rise of sort of fascism again, and it's kind of easy to be like, we lived through this before. It didn't go that well. Why are we doing this again? And I think that surprises me is how excited people are for it, how people seem to really like it in certain ways, which would not have been obvious to me.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things. I read a lot of science fiction and I watch a lot of science fiction as you do. It's one of the reasons why I like your work. But one of the reasons why really good science fiction like 1984 lasts so long, Twilight Zone's another great example. It has resonance right now, and it's like it keeps finding relevance within our culture. Like we didn't learn all these Twilight Zone lessons and things like that, like the monsters are due on Maple Street and things like that. And so it's like you keep coming back to it because it's still sadly relevant. Like it's one of those things we haven't resolved, or like, you know what I mean? Like Terminator 2 was like early 90s, right? And we're getting closer and closer to AI, and we haven't learned anything about Skynet and anything. And like, let's just keep going and see where this goes.
Yeah, I think, you see articles about people building robot dogs that could jump over buildings, and it's like, why are we doing this? I don't know. There's I don't know if I want to get too into it, but for a while I had a day job in the tech world, and which is in a lot of ways very, some of the best work is happening there, but I found that there was kind of this weird amorality there, and by that I mean there was a lot of people saying, like, can we do this? How can we do this? And not so many people going, should we do this?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a lot of people pushing the boundaries for things we can do, and very few people are really, at least people with major decision-making abilities, saying, should we do this? Is it something we really should do? Is it great to do it? Is this going to better society to do this? And I don't know. I think we're living in weirdly amoral times, I think, where those types of questions aren't being asked enough.
Yeah, I want to tie back to your paintings, but I just want to add to that I think sometimes too there's a weird, I guess, similar to amoral, like an optimism, I guess, of like nobody really considers that, like, like Facebook sounded nice at the beginning, right? Like you can connect with your grandmother and your family members and all that stuff. Look up that kid in high school, see who you know what I mean? See all those kind of things. And then it never occurred to anybody that, like, it could be used for evil, or that people would be committing suicide on the network and the platform. You know what I mean? Like, it's a weird thing where, like, I don't know if they just don't think of that, or if it's just like they're so locked into, like, everybody will like the like button, and they don't realize that the psychological health and stuff of how much it damages people for, like, I didn't get any likes for my outfit.
Yeah. Well, I think again, I don't think that people who came up with it had bad motives necessarily, but I think, this is true everywhere, but we've shifted to this mode where it's about making money and optimizing, and now that we've got computers crunching numbers and telling us, like, really how to, like, Facebook has 1 billion users, like, they can figure out exactly how to make their product as addictive as they want to. Not to single out Facebook necessarily, but that's, a lot of companies are doing this, and nobody's sitting there going, well, wait a minute, how is this affecting the fabric of society? Like, I don't know, is it too late to put the genie back in the bottle? I don't know.
And so this is why I want to turn back to your paintings, because specifically the Astronaut, and he reminds me of the Marvel Comics character, the Watcher, who hasn't shown up in the movies, but in the comics, right? The Watcher is like, he shows up in, like, major pivotal moments or major stories. And so I was wondering, like, when you're putting the paintings together, how much time do you also then think, or are you consciously selecting the body language of the astronaut? Like, is that part of the creative process? Is he passing judgment, or is he just kind of just like a silent witness, like he can't get involved at all? And so we've made our decision. We're going to do AI. We're going to do Skynet. And then he's just going to sit there and, like, watch what happens.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting parallel you drew. I think that's pretty close to how I think of the astronaut operating in my paintings. I want this character, the astronaut, to be a very blank figure. It's never clear who's in the astronaut suit, or I use the posture of the astronaut to denote certain things that you could call emotions or reactions. But I generally want the astronaut to be a very sort of empty vessel. And that I think it's for most people, it's pretty clear when they look at my work, when they see a few of these paintings, there's an astronaut figure in each and every one of them, that they kind of naturally place themselves in the astronaut's boots, so to speak, shoes, and walk around in the suit. And so they can see this world that I'm creating from the vantage point of this very neutral observer. And that's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the years, and is something that I now do somewhat deliberately, because I want to, the astronaut, even though the astronaut appears in all of my works, it's really more about the world that the astronaut is wandering around in. And so I want people to take a look at this world pretty objectively. And the astronaut actually is, it was a kind of accidentally good idea I had a long time ago. It actually works pretty well to sort of put you in this world and allows you to think about it in a way that you might not have if it was just sort of you. You think about it like, there's a lot of things we take for granted in our modern world that when you look at them from the vantage point of this strange observer. You kind of look at them differently. So that's kind of something I do with the astronaut figure, I think, pretty deliberately.
Yeah, no, it makes sense because like I mentioned, I guess we're similar of age because like leading into the 80s, into the 90s, into 2000, it was this bright shiny future, and the astronaut, especially the old school one, the Apollo ones, they kind of represented this
Mm-hmm.
nobility, and like the NASA was really like the height of science and technology and engineering,
Yeah.
far before we had Google and all these other things, and so the astronaut kind of represents this really kind of nostalgia, I guess, for the way things
Mm-hmm.
were kind of simpler back then, but also kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
futuristic. So he's kind of paralleling the two worlds, which is what you were talking about before, and the way you kind of mentally think about these things.
Yeah, no, that's the astronaut who appears in each of my works. It's modeled after the Mercury era astronauts, which is the very first American astronauts who went into space in the '60s. And yeah, the reasons why I picked that era of astronaut is pretty much exactly like you said. It was a real sort of utopian era. Like space is seen as this really optimistic future, and I do feel like we've really gotten away from that recently. And then the other reason why I picked that era is that back then they were staying inside their little tiny capsules, so they didn't need these big bulky suits. I like that the astronaut suit that I paint is a little bit trimmer. You can really feel the kind of human in there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas once you start going out into space, you got these big Michelin Man type astronaut suits that
Yes.
feel a little bit less like it was a person in there, maybe.
So as we're wrapping up, I just want to ask a couple more questions. I want to kind of stick with your work, and I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of a weird analogy, so I apologize, but your paintings echo Gary Larson's Far Side in a way, in terms of sarcasm and humor, but also you're framing a specific moment. Like you have to capture the
Mm-hmm.
exact moment in terms of the storytelling. Like it's like when you flipping through TV channels and you land on a movie and like it's obviously 20 minutes in or something like this. So in terms of storytelling, and as you kind of you kind of think about all these different themes and different ideas, how do you know how to isolate and find the exact right moment of the story that you're trying to tell or trying to communicate? And like, do you sometimes find that you've started like isolated the wrong moment, quote unquote, for the trailer, and then you have to kind of start all over?
That's a really good question. It's funny, I haven't thought about Gary Larson that much in a very long time. But when I was a kid, I had a couple of his books that were really important to me.
Your
And
sense
it's
of
funny, I
humor is
remember
very
reading something.
yeah. Your sense of humor. It's both of you. You got your work and his work is very sarcastic. I know it's a type of different
Yeah,
sense of humor, but it's like it's
yeah.
one panel, and there's a
Hmm.
humor and a playfulness to it, and science.
Yeah, no, I remember reading an interview with him for a long, long time ago, and I'm probably butchering the exact what he exactly said because it was a long time ago I read it. But I remember him, you know, talking about how for one of his panels, like there's one I'm thinking there's a lot where he has like a cow that's just exactly in the right spot, and the cow has it's positioned just so that it's just so awkward and funny, and
Hmm.
that if the cow were like positioned a little bit differently, it wouldn't quite have worked.
Yeah.
Or there's a famous one of like there's a kid who's pushing on the door at the entrance to like the genius school, and it
Yeah.
says pull, and he's pushing on it.
Yeah. Center for
Um,
the Gifted or something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and he really, I think, again, I'm paraphrasing, but he really thought of these little characters he's drawing as kind of actors in this play that he had to position exactly right to get the humor and the emotion exactly right, and that's actually very similar to how I think about my work. A lot of times, when I'm drawing up these paintings, when I'm mocking them up, I'll have the astronaut in, and it's not quite doing exactly what I want it to. And sometimes I'll just swap it, like I'll move the helmet, like the helmet needs to be tilted like at a slightly different angle, and all of a sudden that is exactly it's exactly what I was trying to say. So I guess what I'm saying is, not to say that I'm like Gary Larson, he's one of the most successful cartoonists of all time, but I do think of arranging the pieces of my paintings kind of like a small play, and I think he probably approached his cartoons in a very similar way, and that moving things just a little bit over left or right or tilting the head can really make like all the difference in the world in terms of getting across exactly what it is you want to say. So that's a really interesting point. I'll have to go back and look at some Gary Larson cartoons now.
Yeah, because it's like most of the time, the astronaut is not always directly looking at us. He's kind of maybe a little bit off. Like you said, he's a little tilted sometimes, looking at something kind of different.
Mm-hmm.
But also because he's got the classic sunshade, like it's the darkened face, so you don't see his face at all.
Mm-hmm.
You don't actually quite know what it is that he's looking at, right? And so it all of it kind of like comes together and kind of your work is deceptively simple. You know how you sometimes read like a chapter or a couple of paragraphs in a book and you're like, okay, that makes sense, and you think about it and you're like, all right, whatever. And then you put the book down and then you walk away and you're like, wait a minute, that was a really profound statement. Like, you know what I mean? It just took you a second to like for the quarter basically to drop in the slot. And it's like, well, that writer's really good. That's sometimes I think your work sometimes gets I guess I don't want to say dismissed because that's kind of mean, but like that kind of tone where like, oh, it's just like pop culture. And I know sometimes the snootier people will kind of classify it as lowbrow. I guess that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But then when you actually like think about it and you like walk away from it, then you're like, whoa, there was some like depth to it. And the way that, like I said, the way that the astronauts kind of just watching this tableau and watching it all unfold and just being the silent specter, it's kind of there's like layers to it. It's not just as quite as simple as you think it is.
Well, thank you. I really, really appreciate that. And that's, again, right from the early days when I first started these paintings, that was something that I really wanted to do. I kind of wanted them to hit on a couple levels. I was always okay with, people just came and saw my work and they're like, oh, that's funny. This guy painted, an astronaut hanging out with Chewbacca. That's cool. I like Chewbacca. And if that's like kind of all they got out of it, I was like, okay, that's fine. If they like it on that level, that's cool. But I did try to weave in, I've always tried to weave in, something a little bit more profound in there. And that's one thing I've gotten a lot better at over the years. My early paintings, I was not very good at it at all, but I've gotten a lot better at it over the years. And I think one of the real pleasures of my art career is that people really do get that. I think, at least, the people I hear from on social media, and I think they really do get the underlying message of what I'm saying, that even though, I do use this language of, science fiction movies and pop culture and bits and pieces of stupid things, and I'll make a painting with a Toys R Us in it or something, which seems a little bit juvenile, that people really, really have gotten the message behind my work, which is, as a artist or a writer or a movie maker or a musician or anybody who does anything creative, I don't know if there's any bigger compliment than that people, you're saying something, you're kind of shouting into the void and people are hearing it. So I don't know, that's been, probably one of the highlights of my art career is that, people do get the message that I'm kind of hinting at.
Yeah, that is cool. So then are you getting closer to getting the stuff that's in your head out onto the canvas, onto the paint? Because that's also the other creative struggle sometimes, is closing that gap between what you see in your head and getting that out into the world. Yeah,
I think that's another thing that I've gotten a lot better at. When you first start as a painter, you're really worried about this sort of like, does this look good? Can I actually paint an astronaut that looks like an astronaut? And you're worried about all kinds of different things on that level. And it's not until much later where you really get like, is this painting saying exactly what I want it to say? Is it setting the exact emotional tone? Is there some consistency between my work that's, say, if you look at all of my paintings, you kind of get a story. Those are things that kind of came for me later in my career. And I think the last couple of shows I've done, which, have come out during this pandemic, were kind of a real test for me, because they weren't just talking about, it wasn't just a conversation about my work, and it wasn't even just a conversation about the future. It was really a conversation about what we were all living through right at this moment. It was almost like I was, painting in real time about what's happening now. And I had no idea if people would really respond to it. And I've been very pleasantly surprised that they really have. I think, it's really hard to make something, make a piece of artwork that talks about the time you're living in right now as it's happening, but that hopefully also resonates later on down the line. So I'm not going to say I'm hardly at the end of my line in terms of being able to do things successfully. I'm sure I've got lots of room to grow and learn, but I do feel pretty happy that the work I've done over the last 6 months, I think, has kind of successfully been a really successful way for me to talk to people during a time when I can't talk to people, really, at least not in person.
Yeah, so that brings up my final point, I guess, which is like, how are you balancing Instagram versus like art galleries? Because you've had a number of shows in a number of cities and countries, and I enjoy the art gallery experience. And I'm not saying or suggesting that one is quote unquote better than the other. They're obviously like, as a painter, as somebody who works on a visual medium, they're both two unique platforms, and both offer your audience and your fans unique experiences. So how are you balancing Instagram versus galleries?
Well, it's always been a balance of both, and I think that's still true right now. It was actually kind of instrumental for me to realize, and this is a long time ago, I realized like 10 years ago that, probably 99.9% of people who ever see my work see it online only. They don't get to see it in person. And, for a lot of artists, especially a lot of, more traditional painters, that's seen as kind of a bummer. Like, oh, well, you really got to see it in person. It's so much better. And like, that's true. Like, it is cool to see work in person. It's always better to see it in person. But the ability to, I was talking a little while ago about the amorality of technology, but it does do some amazing things. Like, my career couldn't exist without it. The fact that I can, I've had paintings that I've put on Instagram that literally maybe 2 humans alive have seen in person. They haven't even left my studio. And all of a sudden, literally tens of thousands of people are seeing it all over the world is frankly amazing. Like, that's incredible. Like, I can't even say how amazing that is for me as an artist. So that part of it has always been important. And, the galleries, I guess there's 2 points. There's the business side of the gallery, which is important for me as an artist. But then I think that's what you're hinting at, is like the actual ability to see the work in person in a gallery. Is that kind of what you were wondering about?
Yeah, because the problem I think with the internet is that you obviously, like, if you post a painting and I'm like, that painting's terrible, I can just like walk away and then just like not see anything else they do or anything like that, because the internet is just full of distraction. But when you go to a gallery and you kind of immersed into a handful of rooms of your work, then you get to see a better sense of who you are. You get, in a sense, forced to kind of like go through your work, or the work that you're presenting, in this case for the quarantine exhibition. I recently went to our gallery, the AGO, Art Gallery of Ontario, and they had a Diane Arbus exhibition. And I knew the name, and I'd seen some of her, like the twins from The Shining. I'd seen a couple of photos, but I didn't really know her stuff. And obviously I could like look up stuff on Instagram or Google or whatever, and I could see a bunch of her stuff. But going room to room, I was like, you get to kind of be immersed in her world and see all the kind of, see if there's certain themes that kind of show up and stuff like that. And yeah, I was like, by the time I left it, I was like, whoa, this girl's really cool. I'm in. Like, I like her. Like, I'm a fan now. That's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. When I was in my formative years, when I was maybe like 20, I went to see a big show of Mondrian's work in New York. Who, I mean, I think most people know Mondrian, and art people are like, yeah, he's good. But he's kind of known for this very, very strict, almost style of just sort of blocks of color. And I remember going through this whole gallery, and at the very end of his life, he moved from after World War II, or maybe during World War II, he moved to New York from Europe. And he actually he was really influenced by jazz, the jazz scene in New York, and started doing these paintings that were for him much more lively, I think. And if you had just sort of seen them online, you'd be like, oh, hey, another geometric Mondrian. But after moving through this whole gallery of his work, these paintings at the end felt like really full of life and lively and everything. And I don't know, I think about that a lot in terms of, I don't know, you got to kind of live with an artist's whole experience to really kind of get what they were thinking and be in their world. So I don't know. That's a long story, but
yeah, I ramble too. Don't worry.
And obviously, I want people to see my work in person, and it's been, there's obviously a lot worse things happening in the world right now. So I don't really want to complain about it. But my last 2 shows that have come up during this, people haven't really gotten to see in person, and that is it's a bummer. Again, there's much worse things happening in the world. But as an artist, you spend a lot of time working on these shows, and it's great that people see them on Instagram. But if nobody can go see them in person, it does feel a little empty. So I don't know. I hope we can return to a time where people can go look at art shows again. I certainly miss it myself quite a bit. I know other people do. Hopefully, when the world becomes a safer place and we get back to doing all those things we used to do, that we can, hopefully museums and galleries will survive through this until then. Because I agree with you. I think it's a really important piece of looking at art to kind of immerse yourself in it in person.
I just want to add too, like, you also don't know what's always out there, and so sometimes you go to a gallery and you might want to go see your stuff, or somebody, like I went to see Diane Arbus at the AGO, and then all of a sudden you wander to the next room and you're like, yo, who's this guy? Like, what's happening here? This stuff is amazing. Like, you don't know always what's out there, right? And you don't know how to search for, like, you can't ask Google, find me cool stuff. It doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest inspirations to me, and the things that I try to capture in my work, is this kind of element of exploration and surprise. This idea that, like, I often think back to times when, like, I'd travel to a city I didn't really know, and you'd be wandering around, and all of a sudden you'd go over the top of some hill and there's a beautiful view that you didn't even know was there. And that's a similar experience to discovering a new artist that you had never heard of, in a museum or a gallery. Those types of things are really, really inspiring to me. And the things that I just, we haven't been able to do, while we're all kind of stuck for the most part in some sort of a quarantine. You can't really travel. You can't really get new experiences. You can't go look at art. You can't even go to a movie theater and see, the latest Marvel movie, which is a bummer. But hopefully someday soon we'll get to do that again.
So where can people find you online, especially with your IG, to see some of your work, or to see if you have some shows coming up once we eventually get back to galleries?
Yeah, my name is Scott Listfield. I'm online at Scott Listfield. That's ScottListfield. My website is astronautdinosaur.com, and I'm pretty easy to find via Google. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and all the usual places too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your time, Scott. We covered the current exhibition Quarantine, which runs till October 10 in New York City. And we covered like Gary Larson, Far Side, Terminator 2.
Yeah. Shout out to Gary Larson, Killer Mike.
There you go. Yeah. So I think we covered quite a bit, didn't we?
We did. That was good. That was a lot of topics.
Yeah. So thank you for your time. That's it. There's nothing else we gotta cover or anything. Oh, you know what? We didn't talk about the Tim Hortons piece.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I let down all my Canadian people.
All right. If you want to talk about the Tim Hortons piece, we can.
All right, give me a couple of minutes on the if you have the time, I appreciate it. Because one of the things that I like about your stuff is you also, not just the sci-fi elements, but you also sprinkle in kind of corporate advertising logos, those kind of things. And one of the pieces you had was the Tim Hortons logo, which was kind of strange. Where did that come from, or how did that one come about?
Yeah, that's it's funny. That's one of my weirder paintings. And I'm always nervous when I do something that feels kind of a little esoteric or weird. And then it's often those pieces that people love the most. So I've learned to kind of embrace the things that are a little bit weird. So I have a bit of a background in design. And so I'm always interested in logos, and how I often think of like a modern landscape as a series of like repeating logos and colors that we've created for ourselves, as opposed to trees. We have, a McDonald's logo next to a Tim Hortons logo, next to a Burger King logo or whatever. And that's something I've kind of thought about for a long time. I had a show that I did, I guess it was 3 years ago now, here in Los Angeles, that I called Franchise, which I had been thinking about. I'd made a couple paintings referencing In-N-Out, the very famous West Coast burger place that people here love.
Secret menu.
And people are really, it's a secret menu. People here love In-N-Out. Like, it's just like this real like way of life thing. And I struck up a conversation with a friend of mine who worked in the gallery at the time about how kind of each regions, certainly in the United States, but also elsewhere, they have these, places like that. Like in the South, there's Waffle House, and I grew up in the Northeast. We have Dunkin' Donuts, and in Canada, obviously, there's Tim Hortons, and in Texas, there's Whataburger. There's these like local chains, franchises that are kind of regional that just people love, and it's this weird thing. As I dug into it, it really kind of ties into a sense of nostalgia because you probably went to those places when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But it also ties into like this real sense of like regional pride, almost like a local team, like a local basketball or football team or something. And so like people feel really, really tied to these things. And so I came up with this idea to make this whole series of paintings that, again, I called franchise, about these weirdly specific local regional places that people loved. And I had them set kind of in these semi-dystopian landscapes that would be appropriate for that region.
Mm-hmm.
So apologies to Canada. I set Tim Hortons in this kind of like frozen Arctic winterscape. And I set the Waffle House in the South in this kind of swamp. And I made a Starbucks, even though Starbucks is everywhere now, but I made it in this sort of like Pacific Northwest forest. And it was a show that it was actually really fun to research all these different brands and logos. And a lot of times they've got very unique architecture, like their buildings are shaped funny, and they've got very bright specific colors. And it was one of the more fun shows to research. And I thought at the time I did, I thought this show might be like the last show I ever do. Like, is anybody going to want to buy any of these paintings? Like, who's going to buy a Tim Hortons painting? Who's going to buy a Waffle House painting? Who's going to by a Randy's Donuts painting.
Yes.
And it turned out to be, at the time, one of my most popular shows ever. People really, really responded to it and loved it. And, it gets back to the thing I was talking about exploration of different parts of the world. And I think people, I don't know, people who get to know my work kind of enjoy seeing the astronaut go to a place that feels familiar to them, either their city or their local place. So yeah, it's funny. The Tim Hortons piece in particular was one where I was thinking, like, why am I painting this? Is this the dumbest idea I've ever had? And shout out to all my Canadian friends. Like, they were so excited to see a Tim Hortons in my painting. But I hear about that one all the time. People write to me about the Tim Hortons piece all the time.
It reminded me of remember the Sylvester Stallone movie Demolition Man? If you blocked it out, that's fine. It was a terrible movie. But they had Taco Bell in there, and I don't remember what year that movie was set. But the idea that Taco Bell had survived decade after decade, and to be in this like future where you could freeze criminals and do all these things, it's very jarring. But at the same time, it's like, oh, that's kind of comforting too in a way. Like, the future's not that different, if that makes sense. And so it's the same thing with the Tim Hortons. Like, it is a bit of a dystopian future, but it's still familiar in a sense.
There's a scene in, have you seen Ad Astra, the Brad Pitt movie that came out last year?
Mm-hmm. He goes after Tommy Lee Jones' dad.
Yes, yes. There's a scene, I'm blanking on what it is. He's flying away from, I think he's flying out of the moon. And again, I don't remember when this movie is set, some point in the future. But he's flying away from the moon. And you can see on the lunar landscape, there's a little neon sign for, it was like Kentucky Fried Chicken or some sort of chain restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Had a location on the moon. And that was actually, it speaks to me. That was probably my favorite part of the movie. Like, it just cracked me up. Because I don't know, that feels really realistic. Like, I think whatever the future holds, a lot of these fast food places, they're still going to be around. We're still going to, no matter how far into the future we go, we're going to still want that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of love that incorporation of what feels sort of mundane and early 21st century, placing that in, 200 years from now feels, I don't know, kind of fun and weird.
We've set up Tim Hortons in Afghanistan for obviously the Canadian troops and things like that. And I know there's a couple of other kind of like, I don't think it's McDonald's, but there's a couple other corporate chains as well have set up a couple of restaurants, I guess, for the troops, just to have a little bit of familiarity and like have a taste of home, basically, of what you're talking about, right? And it's just weird because it's like when you go to the site and you have to put in your little zip code or your postal code to find the locations, whatever. Afghanistan is listed there, and it's just like, why would you in there. Like it just seems so far flung, right? Like you expect it to be in New York
Mhm.
City, you expect it to be in different places, and then it's like, yeah, it's because
Mhm.
it's like what you're talking about. Where like, as weird as it is, it's just like in the middle of this war zone. They just want to give people some
Mhm.
familiarity, some comfort, and they know for like 2 minutes or 5 minutes you can kind of go there, and it's everything's normal. You know how to order, you know what the food is like, all of that.
Yeah, that gets like exactly to what I was talking about with that sort of there's a strange familiarity, nostalgia, comfort to those places, even if you haven't been to one of them in 20. Like I don't go to a lot of fast food places myself, but there's still this like just innate sense of being home almost with some of those places, which is I have mixed feelings about it because like I don't love some of those places for a number of obvious reasons, but it's there. It's in my brain. I can't get rid of it.
Well, and as you said, it's part of our landscape, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
I've been to LA many times, and of course it's just like when you're driving and you see the in and outs, and I know enough that
Mm-hmm.
like it has a secret menu,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't order like a tourist basically. But again, it's that experience though, right? Like you go to California, you go to In and Out, and you come back. Like so,
Mm-hmm.
it's the way our quote unquote our system, our cities and stuff are set up.
Yeah, it is. It really is. That's the way we've it's the modern landscape, I guess. Like I said.
hmm Yeah, so I've taken up a lot of your time. I apologize. But thank you so
No,
much.
it's fine. Thanks for talking to me.
Yeah, no, it was a good time. I enjoyed the conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for talking to me. Have a good one.
Yo, that was dope. That was Scott Listfield, and I am Sammy Younan. Before I go, if you want to stay informed, if you want to be the cool kid on the block with all the inside info, I got a way for you to do that without going on social media. My newsletter, My Pal Sammy, is handy and dandy in that order. TV and book and podcast and you name it recommendations. I just hung out with a painter on this My Summer Lair episode. Clearly, I have taste. Well, some taste. If you go to mysummerlair.com, you can sign up for the newsletter without the headaches and stress of social media. You're welcome. My name is Sammy Younan. This has been My Summer Lair. Thank you for listening to me in a Netflix world. Art, yo.